Hello, welcome to Bumbling Through Dungeons, the show that rightly acknowledges Brittany's place in the pop pantheon. My name is Mark, and today's topic is... What is today's topic? Let me check my notes. Oh, right! Today's topic is taking better notes. See what I did there? It's a show on notes, and I look down at my you get it. So anyone who has played D&D for long enough has some horror stories about note-taking, where they get to the end of a session and they look down at their notes and it's just a bunch of scribblings of random words and phrases that made sense to them at the time, but without the context of being in the session, in the adventure, and looking back on it maybe a day later, maybe a week later, and trying to figure out what it meant. So maybe you're checking your notes from the last session as you're about to head into the next one, and you're trying to make sense of it. Everyone has some horrible stories like this where they just weren't able to make heads or tails out of anything that they wrote down, so why do it in the first place? The answer to that question, I think, is because if you have a good note-taking system, it can enhance your game. It can help your game. But I think there are a few pitfalls to avoid. The first I already mentioned is just writing down chicken scratch that you're really not going to be able to figure out later. The second pitfall that I think you need to avoid when it comes to note-taking is note-taking at the expense of paying attention to what's going on around the table. I've seen this a couple times. I've actually seen this in myself. I've been guilty of it myself once or twice, where I'm trying to take such detailed notes to get all the different things that are happening in a scene and all the names and all the details that I'm not really present in the scene. I'm not really present in a role-playing sense, in combat, whatever it might be. So there is downtime, and I think that's a great time when you have downtime as a player to start taking some of those notes, to go back through the last 30 or 45 minutes of gameplay and write down the major things that happen. But I think if things are going on that you could be taking part in, it's always more important to be present at the table as a character and a personality than it is to be taking notes. And in anything in this video, I'm not talking about things that your DM is going to prompt you on, that you're going to need to write down word for word. Things like prophecies or riddles or puzzles or the exact wording or instructions from an NPC. These are things that you'll be able to ask, like, what did they say exactly again? And probably multiple players will be writing this down however it is that they take notes. What I'm talking about here are the moments in between where you're trying to write things down that are going to help you as a player. And much like some of the other videos that we've done already, for example, music, where I asked, do you need to have music at your table? And the answer is no. You can use it to enhance your game, but it's not necessary. I think notes at times are probably a bit more necessary, but in general, especially if you have a good memory for these things, the answer to the question, do I need to take notes, will oftentimes be no. And for some players, it might always be no. But I think it's something that's worth looking at more closely, because I do think if you develop a good system for note-taking, that it really can help you and the other players at the table. So I have 3 strategies or tips that may help you to develop a good note-taking system. And I say they may help you because each one of these has helped me at some point, because my note-taking was abysmal, and my memory for these things, I find that when I'm DMing, my memory for what happens in the adventure and in the campaign is very good, but less so as a player. And I think this is probably true for many people, because you're not the one developing the sessions, developing the adventures, and having to maybe read the source material of what it is that you're running. So a DM is much more intellectually invested in a lot of the material, so it is going to be easier to remember. So especially when I'm playing, I really struggle with this, and each one of these has helped me out quite a bit. So the first tip that I've used to some success is mind mapping. Now, if you do a Google search for mind mapping, a lot of different images will come up, and the central idea is that it's an intuitive system of note-taking that more closely maps itself to how your mind works. Our minds don't necessarily work in list format, and we can't really sit down and write a whole narrative of a session at the table. We don't have time while we're sitting there. So we have to think and write in general ideas, but we have to group them together in a way that's going to make sense to us later on. So within mind mapping, you might only have a word or two, or at most a short phrase that acts as your central idea. And then you have other bubbles or lines branching out from that central idea that are linked to that central idea. And these are your details, these are your sub-scenes within that. And the idea is that it's showing how the ideas are linked together. And it also helps if you're able to provide a small illustration to go along with this too, because our minds work very visually. So it adds to help add some sort of illustration to the words that we write down. Now, I'm horrible at drawing things. I don't have any artistic skill in that sense, but I will try to do small, crude drawings to help myself remember certain things, and I find that it does help. I also find that when I go back and I look at my notes, I can make sense of the random one or two words here or there if they're linked in thought bubbles to other related terms and ideas that happened within the adventure. So the idea is that you're grouping ideas into either thematic or chronological scenes or groupings in order to help them enhance one another and enhance them when you're looking back on it and trying to remember what each one means. So I'll link down in the description to a couple cool videos describing mind mapping by experts in mind mapping that can talk about it a lot more in detail than I'm able to, but I have found it a very intuitive way of note-taking that has really helped me at the table. My second strategy is sharing note-taking duties at the table with your fellow players. So this is something that I sort of stumbled upon with a group that I'm running with right now, and I won't take credit for the idea. I think it was someone else's idea at the table. I had been trying to take fairly comprehensive notes and had discovered mind mapping by that point, so I was doing a little bit better, but I was still struggling to get everything that I thought I needed to get. And at some point I was trying to remember all the different plot hooks and quests that we had been given in order to try to prioritize them. And one of the other players at the table gave me her list, and it was much more comprehensive than mine. It was much more detailed than mine, and it was much more organized than mine was to that point. And we started to talk about this, and she said, why don't I just take the quest and be the note taker for our quest log? And that made a lot of sense to us because she enjoyed doing that. She enjoyed reviewing what we still needed to do, what we hadn't yet done, what we had already accomplished. So it was like knocking off, her quest chains and saying, okay, we should go here because there's 3 things that we could do here. That was something she really enjoyed doing at the table, and I was happy to offload those duties because I was doing a much poorer job of tracking everything that we needed to do or could do within this world. Simultaneously, I was doing pretty well at getting all of the major scenes and all of the major plot developments, but I was really struggling with individual names and places and characters and how they interlinked. So it was a lot of the details that I was losing. And another person at the table, another player at the table said, okay, well, I've been keeping track of a lot of this anyway, and I'm trying to piece together how a lot of these interlinkages between characters might be beneficial to us down the road. So why don't I be the detail person, for lack of a better term? And so what ended up happening is there were 3 of us at the table that all split up note-taking duties. My job ended up being just scene to scene. I was basically just writing down a narration of what happened. So it wasn't in any detail. It was very broad, high-level descriptions of each scene and what happened. Oftentimes I wasn't even writing down the names of everyone that was there. But then when we met the next time, say we had to skip a meeting and it was a while between sessions, we could go back and they could say, okay, what happened? And I had my notes right there, and I could say, all right, we did A to B to C to D to E. Here's what happened last session. And then the detail person would fill in the details of each of those scenes with anything that we may have missed or that I may have missed. And then the third player would say, all right, here is what I think our highest priority is. Here are some other things that we can consider. What's our next goal? What are we going toward next? And it worked really well. It was a very harmonious sharing of note-taking duties because I think it's very hard for one person to take all of those different responsibilities and all of those roles within the group. I also think you're wasting a lot of time if more than one person is trying to do more than one of those things. So if you have 2 people keeping a quest log, what's the point of that if you can always just turn to one and say, what do we need to do? So these are 3 that we came up with that worked really well for us at the table. It's not necessarily the only roles that you can have in note-taking at the table. I don't know what others might be, but you might think of a new way to slice it up so that everybody's doing something that they're good at or that they want to do, or you could split it up different ways, I'm sure, but the point is work together with your fellow players, because if more than one person is writing down the same things, then you're probably wasting time at the table, wasting effort and mental energy that could be better spent elsewhere. And the third and final strategy that I want to talk about, this one I think applies to players or DMs, and it's something that's helped me in both of those roles at the table, and that is doing session write-ups afterward. Now, I always make sure to do my session write-ups a day or two after the session. So relatively soon after the session. I'm not waiting weeks to try to remember what happened and piece it together. I'm taking my notes, taking my relatively fresh memory, what's fresh in my memory, and then throwing it down on paper and writing a narrative version of this. So you can see various session write-ups and session reports on different websites and blogs, and I think it's a fun way to do a retrospective. It can help you remember things, and it also helps me to look at the session from a distance and see what happened, what I did either as a DM or as a player, and thus what I might have done differently. So it's actually an introspective process for me as well. So I think there's more than one benefit to session reports or session write-ups. So when I do my session write-ups, I will, again, a lot of times the notes that I'm taking are very broad. It's scene to scene. It might miss some of the details, but I definitely know the plot of what happened. And at the end of it, I've taken to putting a section in that has nothing to do with the session itself, and it's just me reflecting on the session and my place in it. So this has really become one of the best tools that I've had to reflect and improve upon my gaming, whether it's as a DM or as a player. And I'll just have, sometimes there'll be one or two topics that I think about, one or two things that come up during play that I sort of want to explore on my own. So just writing it out tends to help me work through that so that when I encounter it the next time at the table, again, either as a player or as a DM, I have a little bit more perspective and I can say, all right, this is exactly like that last time. Here's how I want to handle it differently. So this is also how I was able to realize some of the gaps and flaws in my note-taking. So as you're doing session write-ups, you're going to have gaps in your knowledge, or you'll be talking through the previous session with your players, with your fellow players the next time, and they'll say, oh no, this is what happened, or you forgot about this. And if you're seeing too many of those, it suggests gaps in your note-taking that can then inform how you approach your note-taking moving forward. And we mentioned some of the pitfalls to avoid early on, and we did also say that you don't necessarily need to take notes or detailed notes, but I think it's worth repeating that if you're doing some of these strategies and you're layering them on top of one another, say you're doing mind mapping and you have one of 3 or 4 different note-taking roles at the table along with some of the other players, and you're doing session reports, it can become overwhelming. It can become too much. So be careful that you're not taking on too much responsibility in this realm, and be careful that it doesn't impede on your ability to show up fully as a player or as a DM at the table. Having a perfect memory of these things isn't necessarily the highest goal that you need to have at the table, especially because you're going to have other people at the table to help correct the things that you don't remember correctly or didn't write down, and vice versa. So you're all able to get there together if there's something that somebody forgot or doesn't quite remember correctly. But I do think on the whole, if you find a balance of note-taking that works for you, I really do think there are a lot of benefits for your game. As a DM, if your players are taking notes and doing session reports, when you get to the next session, you don't have to recap it necessarily. You can throw it to them and say, all right, what happened last session? And you can learn from that too, because if they're focusing on certain elements or forgetting others, then it lets you know as a DM what your group is focused on and what's important to them. So that can be really informative while also delegating duties, because you have a lot to work on as a DM anyway. So I think there are a lot of little smaller benefits like this from note-taking that enhances everyone's shared understanding of the game at the table. If nobody's taking any kind of notes and you're not doing any sort of reflection, one, it's going to be harder to learn and progress. Two, you are eventually going to forget a significant amount of stuff that happens, and it may make it difficult to create a cohesive campaign. So that's it on note taking. I hope you took some detailed notes, and I hope you got some strategies, at least one thing that you can try at the table that can help you take better notes, remember better, reflect better, any of these things that we talked about as benefits. So let me know how it goes down in the comments, and we'll see you next time.